Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I had some mixed feelings for about 10 minutes yesterday, but feel a lot better right now. Um, so this journey towards belonging and being together is, for me at least, was born way before I was even aware that it was a calling for me. Um, and so I do work in education industry. I've had many roles in that world, and I assume at some level I have many more different roles in time. But how I landed doing this work that I do now, which is designing and facilitating in partnership, culturally proficient work. My title is that I steward culture proficient practices for a school district. But getting there, being together with people the way that I I aspire to doing now, started for me after college, a couple of years. I did not intend to go into education. It was not something I felt called to or even interested in, and I worked hard to avoid. As I come from um, a family that all of the children in it have taught, and my mother is a teacher, and my father maybe not official one, but he definitely taught lessons to everybody who came around. I needed a job after in university, I should say. I was I was not even confident that was my place to go, but once I got there, it just became about following what I was interested in. And it led me to a world after graduation where I ended up having a job for a small financial services firm. And I enjoyed the job because it was social and provided opportunity to engage with other people. But it definitely wasn't filling. And I didn't know what I was looking for at that age. Um, but at one point, I was driving into work and I realized this is not what I want to do. And I conceived of the idea of being 24 and retired and maybe just in the spirit of doing work that I could do if I was independently wealthy. And that took me down a really different path. I got into the nonprofit world. I worked for Big Brothers and Big Sisters, working with kids and volunteers. And that was my first time like meeting people and really recognizing that everybody who is coming to this organization wants to give whatever they happen to have to whomever they happen to be with without even knowing what they might be able to offer. And that was a small awakening for me. And I needed a job when my time there ended. I needed a job to cover like a 6 month gap between two opportunities. And I became a paraprofessional, in some places like a classroom aide at an elementary school. And I was with a group of kindergarten students on my first day of work. And I realized, like, a voice spoke to me, like, this is what you're supposed to do, John. And it was immediate and clear that at that point in my life, I needed to be in education. And I even like that day called my mother to share what was going on. And at some level, her response was like, "Yeah, we've kind of been waiting." Is how it felt of like this is your place. And so I jumped right into education, and that took me um, into into working at continue working there. I went to grad school, and I then became a teacher at an alternative school. Now, my paraprofessional job and teaching at the alternative school, I'm still in the same school district. So it's been almost 19 years, 20 years-ish. And I'm blessed to work in an organization that looks for opportunities to grow. And yet at the same time, I left twice. And one of my leavings after being at the alternative school for a couple of years was to go to help start a school in downtown or near downtown Minneapolis. And it was when I was doing that work, meeting with families, meeting with business people, and the people who wanted to start this school community, where we were talking about values, culture that we wanted to build, interests that we wanted to kind of bring to life in the community. And then even meeting with architects and construction companies, and all just to be around people and realize, oh, there are folks that have conversations that's entirely focused on raising the voice and intention of a group, of a community. And we built it into a building. And then once the school year came, it was that opportunity to see come to life all the conversations and the wrestling with ideas and getting clear on culture and getting clear on values through dialogue, that I realized when I looked back on it that this whole community was co-created, that we all came with different ideas of what it would or could look like, and then we made it come to life. And over time, obviously, it changed and it morphed into something else. But it was an eye opener of, well, for me at least, this is the kind of work I'm interested in. I wonder how I might do more of it. At the end of that year, I left that school and I returned to the school district I work in now. And I returned as a dean of students, which at the time in the organization was conceived as like a buildings disciplinarian and manager of culture, specifically student culture. And it was a real sweet spot for me. Um, it was an opportunity where my whole job was building relationships, listening, and sharing with students and with families. And the power of just sitting and listening and not projecting my own solutions onto everything and everyone was there every single day if I wanted to do that. And it was, like I said, a really sweet spot for me. And one one afternoon, I was invited by the principal at the time to join he and his buddy to a Mount Madonna school in California for Chautauqua, where Peter and Angeles Aries and a couple other folks came in and shared with us. And the idea of sitting down and just belonging to a group without having to produce anything, but just to be there and to learn from and build with others, knowing that we'd all just go our separate ways and build and create elsewhere, was a freeing moment. When I returned, bringing that spirit back to my work, working with students who may not always have made the best choices, I just threw myself into continuing to do as good of work as I possibly could, and that led me to being invited to be an associate principal at the same school.
Mm.
And it was at that time where I realized that the work of bringing people together and learning from one another was a much larger and challenging task than I thought it was going to be. Managing and supporting a student culture is one thing because it's high energy, they want change, they want to engage. And then managing and developing relationships and a culture amongst adult staff was a whole new experience. And in doing that, I, over time, found really good, successful practices like sitting down with people and asking questions, hard questions for them and for myself to have the courage to ask. I became very adept at doing investigations. And I think I replaced that, I put that hat on, thinking it was the hat of, the exclusive hat of community building. but it was just one small sliver of relationships. And when I look back on it and putting together, you know, school improvement plans and budgets and all of those things, what I now look back on is what made the groups that I worked with and the work that I did successful when it was successful was that I was doing it with other people. And in many organizations, and I at least experienced this heavily, is that when you take on new roles of leadership, we become more and more lean into our individuality and our own importance, that we have to be the ones with the answer, that we have to be the ones who know we know all the questions that are going to be asked, and we have answers that are specific and direct for every single one of the questions. And that's true. I mean, at some level, when you lead an organization, there are moments where you have to have answers, and there are moments where you have to make hard decisions. But I found so much more enjoyment in sitting down and collectively coming to an understanding with a group of people to make good choices and good decisions that last long term, where people can see their fingerprint on it when I'm not there, if I leave. That was a really big learning experience for me. And as I look back on it, I started to fractalize myself, kind of break myself up into pieces, whereas I wasn't 100% John, in that now I was John. I was John, the associate principal. I was John, the disciplinarian. I was John, the culture developer. I was John, the friend, but I wasn't a single unit of myself. Um, and and that was, I mean, at the time, it seemed normal and natural, and I didn't think about it. But I learned and found that the more I tried to be the title that I was given, the less I actually brought myself to the room. Mm. And people started engaging with my title and not me. And when that happens, and you're trying to co-create an understanding and a belief about something, it's just people dealing with titles, not people dealing with people. And that feels really good when your organization, which is not the energy that I had of my organization, when your organization really just wants to execute. You know, titles can lean on titles to get things done for short-term progress. And it was around the same time that I was understanding that I was invited to, along with another person, to engage in kind of facilitating culture proficient trainings around culture proficiency, I should say, which is a way of looking at and engaging in one's own, becoming more aware of one's own culture and how it affects other people's experiences around you, as it applies, in this case, to education. And a big part of it is it gives language for people to talk about difference. And when I made the shift from being a building person to being a designer and facilitator of learning around culture proficiency, I started to experience the fractalization, the outcome of being fractaled, because I was just bringing pieces of me to my work instead of all of me. And just when I got a taste of that understanding, I had the opportunity to become the principal of a Spanish immersion school at the same time that in the backyard of Minneapolis, we had the death of George Floyd and COVID all came together at one time. So as I adopted this new role as principal of an elementary school, I was taking over a highly respected, a very skilled principal and a friend, and stepping into a role where people were grieving a loss of a principal. scared about what was going on in the world, and wanting to be assured of what we were going to be moving into. And it was during those that first year of trying to bring my whole self to a place to work that it became really clear that people want to talk and they want to know how they are in relation to an organization. And in education, at least from my experience, we get really addicted to execution, just getting things done in the next 50 minutes. And that's our horizon. It's like one class period. And in that class period, all sorts of things have to be done. But when you look at the lifespan of a building, you're looking at a year, two, three, if you have a real vision, 5 years of things to consider. And that execution timeline is really long. Um, but at the time of George Floyd and COVID, the need to be assured and feel safe in every instant was as ever present and almost smothering. Um, and I found myself really needing to, at least I felt the need to quickly establish myself as the leader of the building and be who I am, not the principal that I was replacing. And it became a priority for me to share and to understand the culture of this building, as we had people from all over the world, from all different experiences of what it means to be a teacher, of all different experiences of what it means to be safe in that chaotic time. So I started convening groups of teachers together just to talk and just to listen with questions like, what are you experiencing? What do you hope to experience? And what might that success look like for you? And I got to know them, they got to know me. We designed and we developed a sense of norms and a culture that was very supportive of one another. But there was still a need to, by the staff, to be assured that everything was fine all of the time. There was still a need for the staff to come to terms with the different beliefs they had about education, about being a teacher, about connecting with students, or why and how the school functions the way that it does. And at the end of the first year, I, because of some of the conflict and interpersonal conflict among staff and a want to co-develop a vision for the future, we as a staff sat down and we put up a really big piece of paper on the wall of a horizontal timeline. And my facilitative partner and I walked the community through a timeline, a history of the school from when it was started and what were the highlights of that time, that year, and what were the big things going on, what were the important things going on, what were interpersonal experiences that happened. And we did that for 14 years of the school. And during that dialogue, people got to see the great divides that existed in a culture that was hiding the divides. It was unaware of the divides and differences that might have existed. And those things showed up like the differences between, why one group of teachers who were hired in 2010 or 2015 had a very different vision about what the school was for and who it's to serve than the 18 people who were hired in 2018. Had a very different story of what the school was for and what it was about. And that was different than the people who were hired in 2020. And so it provided fodder and space to have a conversation about who are we? Who do we think we are? Who are we? And who do we want to be? And it all didn't happen just in that 2.5 hour facilitated meeting. It showed up in hallway conversations where somebody would pull up next to me and be like, "Oh yeah, the Senor Franke. Like Marie and I were just talking about classroom discipline, and we had no idea about, and they would just lay out a mini history conversation they had. And over the next couple of weeks, the different group, like people would come to me and say, "Hey, we got an idea for this. We didn't know that we had different understandings of this. So we have, what do you think about this new project? Or what do you think about that new action?" And it brought that that event created space that I didn't even know needed to exist for people to show up more wholly. And it was an opportunity for me to realize, oh my gosh, I'm not showing up wholly. Um, and there's another moment while I was there in which something really scary happened in the classroom. And everybody was safe and fine in the end, but it shook the teacher and some people around. And there was a staff meeting, and in that staff meeting, somebody raised their hand and said, Senor Franke, how could this have happened? And how are we ever going to keep it from happening again? And it weighed really heavy on my heart what had occurred. And I wanted to, like the staff, like not have it ever happen again. But my response came so quickly and so clearly of Principal Franke, the one who knows how to control and make things happen, knows exactly what to do. John, though, isn't sure that's the right thing to do and is not exactly sure what the best next step is. But I was confident that we would do that together. And the moment it came out of my mouth, my ego and my title and all the things that oftentimes drive leaders to make decisions fell on me. Like, oh my gosh, you're seen as weak, you're seen as ignorant, you don't know what to do, and they're not going to respect you anymore. And as I walked out of the staff meeting, trying to shake off this feeling, two people ran up to me and they both grabbed my hands and said, "We'll help figure it out." And that was the gift that the community needed, because it really wasn't my job to fix. It was my job to create the conditions to help support people in finding the solution to what they were experiencing and feeling. And that's what we concentrated on, this group of teachers, was how do we redevelop a sense of belonging, safety, from all the different vantage points that we come from. And my time at that school ended that year. And as I was leaving that role, I felt very good about the work that had been done, because at least to my metrics, learning continued, safety was a priority, and people felt like they had a high role and they were highly efficacious and moving the organization forward.
Mhm.
I then had the opportunity to transition to what I'm doing now, and I adore it, primarily because I have the opportunity to convene people and be with people all day, asking questions about what we're doing and why we're doing it the way we're doing, and are there better ways of doing it. And now what I do is I focus primarily on culturally proficient practices. And that shows up in all sorts of ways. It's not just teaching strategies, but it's how we come together and how we co-create. Um, and I had an opportunity in doing that, as I was introduced to that work. A salient memory of mine is that it took a long time to shake off the roles and culture of being a principal. Because the principal role is an honor to have, but it's also one that really comes with, you need to have a high sense of self, in that you're overseeing a building and the future of a community, essentially, is how it feels. Um, And there was a salient moment where things really shifted for me. I just left that building and I was in my new role doing college proficient work and sat down with a group of principals. These are my people. I know how they work. I think like they do. They think like I do. And my partner and I were invited to a principals meeting. And it was a rambunctious meeting with great conversation. And I jumped in just like I normally would have. And I was disappointed with my partner for not engaging. And I said to them, "Hey," at the end of the meeting, "Hey, where were you in that meeting?" And their response to me was with a poke in my shoulder, was, "Where were you? You didn't show up as you."
Mm.
Um, and it was a moment of reckoning that I was complicit in participating in a meeting in a way that I know is not productive. And it is since that moment to now has been an unlearning of unproductive relational behaviors that that when I was engaging them in my personal life and in my professional life, just had all sorts of debris everywhere because of how I was behaving and just focused on execution all the time. And we're addicted to execution and we're addicted to being right in our schools and in many organizations. And and I felt this really deep internal conflict about who have I been, who do I want to be, and who am I now? And that tension was a constant tension. And I had an opportunity as I was going and doing this culturally proficient work and doing trainings and leading people through that. I was in a place of conflict and I had an opportunity to go and do some work with an organization called Dialogue for Peaceful Change. They're um, they're in Northern Ireland, but they do work all over the world. And they really focus on, as their title says, the dialogic process of understanding and engaging in, in change, be
Mm.
it a violent conflict or an interpersonal conflict, or just one that you're managing inside of yourself or within your organization. And I learned during that time that that the little child addict that is inside of me that wants to be in charge and wants to control everybody sees me is the problem. And that the solution is just stop talking and listen. Because it's in the listening and what other people have to say that a real solution exists. And and in our, at least in my experience in education, there are all sorts of excuses not to do things differently, not to do things that are new. And we probably you all probably have that in your own experiences of I want to make this change because it makes sense. Well, I'm gonna go do it. And then you go do it and you're alone. And that change happens to last maybe 6 months or a year, and then you flat back into the way of being. But bringing people together and talking about who are you, what do you want, what's your current reality, and how are we going to get to where we want to be together is powerful, not just for the organization, but for the individuals involved, because they become the actors. They become the heroes in their own story, in the story that the organization needs to move to the next place, to slow down and relearn, um, and to become more embodied and aware inside of yourself, what you know and what the other people know, to make something new together. And as I've engaged in that, now what I look forward to are more opportunities to sit with people, either in my job or outside of my job, volunteering. I convene groups both at my school and after hours. And in both settings, what is so abundantly clear is that people want to connect. And there's a belief that they don't belong. but we all belong to the story that's in the room, whatever that story happens to be. Just by being there, you're already a part of the solution. And we forget that when all we do is think about how do I make myself right in this moment? The difference between getting it right and being right is a chasm. And we trick ourselves into believing that one is the right one over the other.
Hmm.
Um, and I think what success looks like in doing that for me is just knowing that if I could walk into meetings every single day and know that everybody in the room is there to share wholeheartedly what they have to offer, even if it is nothing, and that the room is comfortable making decisions when decisions need to be made, not just because we only have 45 minutes together, the world would be a better place and we'd all be living well together. And there's just a beauty in being together that leads to something new. I think I need to pause there.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thanks, Johnson. So much is coming up for me and taking notes, and I kind of find myself being fractaled between hosting and being participant and opening things up. So I think it's a great kind of a segue to think about because I have, questions and things to go through, but I like to get the community kind of involved in their reactions. So what are gonna do next is we'll move back into a breakout. And just to in your breakout with your partners, what struck you as you listened to John? And then we'll come back as an overall dialogue interaction. We hate to call it Q&A, but more of a responses and interact some more with John as we come back. So we'll move into our next breakout. What struck you about what as you listened to John share his journey, and then we'll come back together and have a chance to interact some more as a big group with John. So with that, we will move to our breakout and come back in 10 minutes.
My background about a program that I studied in that I knew very little about. I kind of joined it by accident and ended up staying 2 years in the program as a graduate student. Some of you may have heard of it or not, but it was a program between a collaboration between American University in Washington, D.C. and the National Training Laboratories for Applied Behavioral Research, NTL Institute. I don't know if any of you have heard of that or not, but it's an old organization. It was a community building organization. And why I share this story with you is because that 2 year graduate program was essentially an exercise in community building.
Mm.
It was essentially an exercise in community building where you got a master's degree at the end of it if you could tough it out. It was not an easy program to be in because you were working, it was highly experiential, uh, a lot of theory and a lot of foundation work for organizational development, but a lot of interactions. And the process of building community with that program over a period of 2 years was a very powerful and meaningful experience. Sadly, the program existed for 25 plus years, and it put hundreds of students through it. But because of the politics of academia and such, it no longer exists as it did 25 years ago, 30 years ago, actually. So those of us that had graduated from the program, I used to be one of the younger members. I think now I'm one of the older members because so many people have passed on. But uh, this experience with you folks and this community building, it just resonates with me and brings me back to that place where I sat in a circle with 25 other students for a period of 2 years, working out our issues and our discussion points. So I thank you for that, because I haven't experienced this kind of thing virtually in probably 20 some odd years.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harris, for sure.
And I have to tell you that Peter Block was part of that program.
Yep.
Yeah, he one of his textbooks was one of his books was part of our reading assignments. I forget
There you
which one. Flawless Consulting.
There you
That's the
go.
one. Flawless Consulting. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Harris, and everyone as we go through. I know we are at the time a little bit beyond, but John, anything you want to kind of closing pieces that you'd like to leave us with, and we'll begin to close out.
I don't have any like special words to say necessarily, but I'm going to put something in the chat if I can find it real quickly. It's just coming to me now. It's a poem by David White. It came up in my first group. I think it was Kirsten who had mentioned David White. And just this morning, it's not, I don't have it at my fingertips. I'm gonna put a link in the chat. And hopefully it'll work for everybody. It's just a quick poem about gratitude and being with others. And
It's nice.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you all today. And whoever you're with later on, just open up your heart a little bit and it will crack open theirs. Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Encourage all of us. Don't wait for others to convene. Convene others in your space. It doesn't take much to bring these pieces together, small, large as it goes. It is so good to see familiar faces, new faces. Stay in touch. It is a gift to me to be with everybody. With my partner, Maya, we say adieu until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thanks so
You
much,
all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
You
wonderful
all.
to see you all. Bye bye.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you,
Good luck
Andy.
with your job.